63. Hope you're all having a super fantastic sparkling day. So we're on a little early today because we got news that my TV has arrived. So my mum and dad are on their way over to pick me up so we can go pick it up and get it. Yay! It's only been on order since the 1st of January and today is the 20th. Yes, it's only taken them, it's taken them a few days to get it in. So anyway, so today we are, podcast 2363, and we are talking about what roles does trauma play in lost family stories. And trauma often silences stories before they are ever told. I have seen this in my own family with my grandfather. He refused to talk about his days in World War II. It wasn't until just a few years ago I found out why and totally understood why he never talked about it. Family members were able to get little bits and pieces out of him. But trauma overwhelms a person's ability to speak. Depending on the trauma that they had, will determine how much they are willing to speak about it or not speak about it at all. But it can overwhelm their ability to speak about the problem or about the trauma that they experienced. Survival often required silence rather than reflection. So back in like World War II, these guys were coming home having witnessed horrific things during the war and everything else, a lot like we have our military today. When they've been off to war and battle and things, they see things that no human should ever have to see. They experience things, that painful experiences that they bury deep inside in order to be able to move forward. Survival often requires silence rather than reflection. I've already said that, but haven't I? And silence becomes a coping mechanism. Their brain, and there's times too, that the brain will literally block that experience out of their mind. They will have, some of them will have no recollection of that trauma at all because it was so painful and so traumatic for them at the time that their brain went into survival mode and blocked them from remembering that incident. It may come out years later. Sometimes it may not come out at all, but the experience of that trauma will play a role in who they become moving forward. And then later generations inherit gaps without context. They don't know why. And unacknowledged trauma can echo through families as missing history. And like I said, my grandfather never talked about his experiences in World War II, with what he had seen, what he had experienced. And it wasn't until years later, like just a few years ago. I mean, he passed back in 1985. And it wasn't until probably about 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, I actually learned some of what he had been through. He had obviously spoken to my grandmother because she actually typed up this piece of work, this typed up like an essay, a letter, whatever, talking about his experiences. And it was from her recollection of his experiences. And I actually have a copy of that. And reading that, I'm like, okay, I've got to figure out which of this is true, which is not. Because as we say, stories change over time. I want to try and find out what really happened. Just for my own peace of mind. My grandfather was awesome. He used to tell the best stories, and his stories were not life stories. They were stories of my mum and dad just arrived. They were fairy tales, but he changed the endings of them. He would tell the story as most fairy tales are told, but when it got to the living happily ever after, there wasn't a happy ever after. They went off on some wild adventure. Those characters went off on some wild adventures, had some great times, went into these fantasy lands and things. He completely changed the outcome of fairy tales, but he was a very good storyteller in that sense. The stories he did want to tell us from his childhood, he was a very good storyteller with those as well. But acknowledge that some people, based on things that they have been through or events that have happened, may not be willing to share their stories. You have to approach them with silence and compassion. And that's our practical takeaway. Approach silence with compassion rather than judgment. Trauma often explains absence. So, and if you want help navigating sensitive family histories, just send us a private message and we're more than happy to help. But remember that silence is not emptiness, it is often protection. And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hey, Cornetta.